Shabbat Shalom. My name is Cindy Kozierok, and I'm the Director of Education at Beth Radham Congregation. I'm really happy to be here today to share my thoughts on this week's Parshat, Matot Masei, which is actually going to close out the book of Bamidbar. Now, the older generation of Jews who have been wandering the desert has now died out, and the younger generation is preparing for entry into the land of Israel. And one part about the Parsha is actually about urban planning. You know, how many and what kinds of cities will they build? Who will they be designed for? How will they be designed? How will civilization grow up around these designs? And so urban planning is actually a really important theme in this Parsha. And Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who is the former chief rabbi of the Orthodox movement in the United Kingdom, he's one of the leading rabbinical thinkers of our time, and I've recently begun following his website, and I've been very interested in what he calls a section on his website that he calls Covenant and Conversation, and it's aimed at understanding the weekly Torah portion. I highly recommend that you take a look. There's a lot of wonderful material there. He's also developed a family edition of Covenant and Conversation, which has really excellent summarized versions of his sort of longer Dvar Torah. But more importantly, he's got some really interesting questioning that comes up around his discussions of the Parshat. And this week, he decided to focus on one small component of the urban planning, which is specifically looking at what is called a City of Refuge. And I'll just read you what Rabbi Sacks says about it. The cities of refuge were set aside for the protection of those found guilty of manslaughter, that is, of killing someone accidentally without hatred or intention. Because of the once universal practice of blood vengeance, where the family of the victim would get their revenge by killing those responsible, these places of protection were very necessary. As Shoftim puts it, and he shall flee to one of these cities and live. This apparently simple concept was given a remarkable interpretation by the Talmud. The sages taught that if a student was exiled, his teacher was exiled with him. As it is said, and he shall flee to one of these cities and live. So we must do the things for him that will enable him to live. Rambam explains, life without study is like death for scholars who seek wisdom. In Judaism, study is seen as life itself, and students need a teacher to guide them. So, as Rambam explains, our teachers give us more than knowledge. They give us life. Note that this is a halachic ruling containing an important message. Judaism appreciates its teachers, like it appreciates parents. And in one way, they are even more important. Parents give us physical life, teachers give us spiritual life. And when our parents teach us, we are doubly blessed. Physical life is mortal, transient. Spiritual life is eternal. Therefore, we owe our teachers our life in the very deepest sense. And that's the end of what Rabbi Sacks had to say. So I think you can imagine why I like this passage. I'm very proud to be a teacher. I'm a public school teacher, and I love teaching children of all backgrounds and being an important part of Canadian society. And my greatest spiritual fulfillment comes through my calling as a Jewish educator. I am a teacher through and through. Just ask anyone who has ever made a grammar error in my presence. I might have corrected them. And so I wonder, isn't this City of Refuge arrangement a little lopsided? Isn't it a little unfair to the teacher to have to accompany the student to the City of Refuge? Why does he need to be exiled along with the person who caused a death? Our sages establish why this is necessary for the student, that life is not life without study. But it seems like a really bad deal for the teacher. Why should he have to give up his family and all of his other students in order to follow this one student into exile? If teachers are so important, as Rambam tells us, then why must their own lives come second to the lives of their students? Is sacrifice a central component of teaching? Sacrificing the adult's needs for the sake of the child's, or the educator's needs for the sake of the learner? This question is very much on my mind these days as school boards around the world attempt to find a solution for schools this September. Leaving aside the situation in the United States, which is, thank God, dramatically different from what we are dealing with here, I am watching with increasing anxiety as the Ontario government, school boards, health professionals, parents, and educators are grappling with how to get kids back to school this year. Many parents, especially those who work outside the home, need schools to open so that they can return to work and feed their families. The government, too, wants a full return to schools to allow workers to get back to being productive and get the economy restarted. Health experts at places like the Hospital for Sick Children are concerned about the detrimental effects on children from being socially isolated and missing important learning that can only happen in an in-person environment. And they have strongly suggested that a return to school that is as normal as possible is what children need most. Teachers themselves don't need to be convinced of the importance of in-person learning. It's what we do. We worry about our students who don't have stable home lives, for whom school is a refuge. We worry about our students with special needs who need the consistency and supports that only school can offer. We worry because we care. So the obvious answer is that we need to return to schools. Students need to be there to learn, and teachers need to be there to teach. And there's only one problem, and that's COVID. The virus doesn't care about children's needs or societal needs to get parents back to work or how much teachers care about their students. COVID only cares about COVID. So many argue that COVID does not affect children in the same way as it does adults, and the science is still unclear about this. However, they forget that schools are not child-only spaces. Remember those all-important teachers, the ones responsible for the spiritual lives of children? Well, how do we keep them safe? Sports teams are getting the safest environments built for them, bubbles arranged, frequent testing and screening protocols. Athletes are being protected as well as possible, no expenses spared. Are we willing to do even a fraction of that for those oh-so-important teachers? Are we willing to invest the dollars that will be required to upgrade schools that have been falling apart for decades and provide the necessary space, ventilation, sanitizing, screening, staffing, and the myriad other requirements that make a school safer during COVID? Or are we just going to provide inadequate Band-Aid solutions that may very well put our teachers and our children's health at risk? Is education a truly important value or not? As Warren Buffett says about business, only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. For years, educators have complained that the system is underfunded and that students aren't getting what they need. Teachers buy their own classroom supplies, decor, books, learning materials. There is no money for proper caretaking services, nor enough special education supports for students with special needs. Expectations have grown without the funding to match. And now the virus has laid bare how vulnerable our society is to an inadequately funded education system, one that cannot pivot to manage the changes needed because there is no funding available to do so. And so everyone suffers when kids can't go to school, and everyone, not just teachers, must sacrifice to help get them back in the classroom where they can learn and grow into happy, healthy, and productive members of society. Let's not give lip service to the value of teachers. Let's show that we value the work that they do, so much so that we are willing to give them what they need to do it without asking for them to sacrifice their personal safety in return. It's a truly Jewish value, and it should be a value for all of society. From my family to all of yours, I wish you a healthy and a restful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.